You know, economic reports, they can often seem a bit dry, just stacks of numbers.
They certainly can.
But sometimes, if you really dig in, they tell a fascinating story, especially for a huge economy like India's.
Absolutely. There's always a narrative behind the figures.
So today, we're going to take a deep dive into India's latest industrial performance. We want to understand what these numbers really tell us about demand, within the country.
Sounds good.
We'll be drawing mainly from a key piece, an editorial in the Hindu from July 2nd, 2025, titled India's Industrial Slowdown and Weakening Demand.
A very relevant source.
Okay, then let's unpack what the data is actually showing us. So these latest industrial production figures from India, they paint quite a stark picture, actually. We're seeing India's industrial growth that's measured by the Index of Industrial Production, the IIP. It hit a 9-month low in May 2025, just 1.2%.
Wow, 1.2%. That's low. And wasn't April also quite weak?
Exactly. That 1.2% followed an 8-month low of 2.6% in April. So a trend is emerging.
Yeah.
And just to give you some context, last year, the average growth was 5.7%. Now, for this fiscal year so far, 2025-26, the average is down at just 1.9%.
That's a sharp deceleration. It really suggests demand is cooling off, and maybe quite rapidly.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting, I think, is how broad this slowdown seems to be. It's not isolated.
Right.
Take the electricity sector, for instance. It contracted by a pretty staggering 5.8%.
5.8%. Wow.
Yeah, that's its worst performance since way back in June 2020.
Oh.
Now, okay, maybe an unusually cool May played some part.
Sure, weather can affect electricity use.
But a contraction that deep, it strongly suggests, lower demand from industries themselves, less power being drawn for production. It hints at something deeper than just the temperature.
Okay, so it's not just electricity feeling the pinch. Where else are we seeing this slowdown?
Well, manufacturing is the big one, right? It's a huge chunk of the IIP.
Yeah.
And growth there slowed right down to just 2.6% in May. Remember, last year it was growing at 5.1%.
Another significant drop.
And again, it's broad. We're seeing actual contractions in quite a few areas. Things like textiles, leather goods, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, even electronics and furniture are shrinking.
That list covers quite a range of goods.
It does.
Oh.
And it makes you ask, why these sectors? Well, many are consumer-facing. They make things people buy.
Oh, okay.
So it strongly implies that demand isn't just failing to pick up. It might actually be weakening further.
So people are buying less stuff.
It looks that way. And here's a really crucial detail. For the first time since November 2023, both consumer durables, bigger items like appliances, cars, and non-durables, the everyday things like food and toiletries, they both contracted at the same time.
Both at once.
Yes. And that simultaneity, it really reinforces this idea of a pretty widespread demand problem hitting the economy.
That simultaneous drop is really telling, isn't it? Because it means it's not just people putting off buying a new fridge, it's maybe more fundamental.
Oh, sure.
And when you drill down into those categories, look at consumer durables. The items seeing significant contractions are very much discretionary spending items.
Like what specifically?
Well, things like footwear, books, plastic furniture, even shaving razors, steel utensils, computers, phones, air conditioners, and coolers, too. Things you can put off buying if money's tight.
Right. Non-essentials mostly.
And even within the non-durables, the essentials, you see contractions in things like meat, honey, fruit juice, jams, sugar, bottled water. The source notes, these are often the things eschewed the quickest during lean periods. So people are cutting back on even small treats or conveniences.
Yeah. So it's everything from new shoes down to maybe not buying that bottle of juice. It really paints a vivid picture of households tightening their belts.
It really does.
And if you look at even more recent data, say from June, like the Purchasing Managers Index, the PMI for manufacturing.
Right, the business sentiment surveys.
Yeah, they sort of echo this concern. They show that demand for intermediate goods components, raw materials, that seems okay. Businesses are still buying those.
Okay.
But orders for capital goods, machinery, equipment, and for finished consumer goods, those are lagging behind. It lines up with the IIP data.
Now, we should probably mention the finance minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, has expressed confidence. She feels urban demand is recovering, and she expects the tax breaks in the recent budget to help boost demand, especially by the festival season later this year.
Yes, that's the official outlook, or hope, perhaps.
And there is potentially good news for rural demand, too, right? The monsoon seems to be progressing reasonably well so far.
That's true. A good monsoon is always crucial for the rural economy.
Yeah.
So if we try to connect all this to the bigger picture, While, yes, rural demand might pick up later in the year if the monsoon is good,
Mm,
urban demand still looks like a bit of a worry based on these May and June indicators. And with global trade still pretty subdued and, frankly, uncertain, this weakness in domestic demand, it doesn't really bode well for India's overall economic performance in 2025-26.
right. That domestic engine needs to be firing strongly, especially if exports aren't booming.
Precisely.
Okay, so just to summarize the main takeaway from this deep dive, India's latest industrial numbers point pretty clearly towards a broad slowdown, and a key driver seems to be weakening consumer demand, hitting both everyday items and bigger purchases.
That sums it up well. And it leaves us and you with an important question to mull over.
Go on.
If consumer spending on both the daily stuff and the bigger discretionary things is genuinely shrinking, how might that fundamentally change the game for investment decisions and overall economic strategy, thinking about the next 6 months to a year?
That's definitely something to consider. How businesses might react, how policy might need to adjust.
Exactly. Food for thought.
Definitely. Keep thinking about those connections. That's all for this deep dive.